As an American, I'm always wondering what the Ruskies are up to over there. Oh, okay, so pretty much an average day, I imagine. But prior to this horrifying reality, which kind of seems tame compared to the bad timeline we currently are on right now, in 1983, during the last major close call to our planet becoming a glass field, 2 cosmonauts were sent into space for an exploratory measure, were then returning home and were fairly jazzed about the idea. Shortly before their descent back into Earth's atmosphere, they would realize something was on the hull of their ship, which would go on to break in and then infect one of the crewmates after attacking the other. After being picked up by the Russian government shortly after making landfall, it would become apparent that one of the cosmonauts was much more of a security risk as the other appeared to be warm food anyways. So in today's episode, we'll talk about what this creature that landed on the hull is, how it interacts with the human endocrine system, and why, as always, everything appears to want to go for the brain when it comes to people. I'm just guessing something about the human brain must be pretty delicious. Okay, so before we start, I have finally moved and I have an area to stream in so that you don't have to see the hundreds of coffee cups I have on my desk. It's pretty sweet. You can find me on YouTube under Roanoke Games and also on the Purple channel under Roanoke Games. I know, very original. So it should be pretty fun. I'm just gonna play horror games basically because that's what I like to do. Or maybe even World of Warcraft because I'm a giant nerd. All right, so we all know the drill by now, but for any of the new people on here, there'll be a timestamp up on screen. If you want to bypass a summary of the movie, then head there and we will get into the actual biological reasons for the attack patterns and target of this creature, as well as its physical morphology. But considering the movie was released on demand, like in Russia in 2020, because the entire world was getting screwed to the wall, odds are you might not have seen it. So if you haven't, definitely go check it out. It's actually a pretty good movie. But for all those others sticking around, let's get into why when you find an alien creature, as always, your first instinct should not be to poke it and see if it's friendly. Again, as with the blob, ignore that 8 portion of your brain that says, yes, 3 ooga-doogas with a long stick should suffice. So we start off our story, and I'm going to sound like CinemaSins, but holy lord, there are so many production companies associated with this. Like everyone and their cousin was in on it. So we start off with 2 cosmonauts returning back to Earth. One is singing nonsense, their words not mine, and they are on their way back to Earth. Detaching from their craft and heading towards home, they begin to talk about what they're going to do once they get there. One mentions how he's gonna go take a shower and he keeps mentioning his wife, so we all really know what he's gonna go do. And the other says that he's heading to, and I'm gonna butcher this because you know what, I just don't speak Russian, Rostov, to attend some business. But he's really just mega vague about it. As they begin their descent process, they get knocked slightly off course for some reason, but are able to recover. Why were they knocked off kilter? Well, as they discover, one of the cosmonauts then looks over and sees something out the window. And then as the other looks, he catches a glimpse of it. As it heads up to the hatch on the pod, it begins opening it. As they slowly drift down into Kazakhstan, which I have to point out, it said multiple times that they crash landed, which, I mean, to me looks like a picture perfect landing. I mean, maybe they were off course, but I wouldn't call that even remotely a crash landing, right? Anyhow, they are found by a local on a horse. As he approaches, he spots one of the cosmonauts seemingly ended with the back of his head bleeding pretty profusely. As he approaches the other cosmonaut, he sees that he's retching near the re-entry capsule. He turns around and shows that his eyes have turned black or even just bloodshot, and his mouth is covered in blood, as well as many grievous wounds, indicating that, you know, something probably isn't right here. We now head over to meet Dr. Tatiana Klimova, and I am literally just copying what they said, so, accent aside, currently at a review board meeting. She apparently held some kid underwater for a minute to cut off air to his lungs in order to help with his sickness. Now, I'm sure there's a reason for this, but it might just be my perspective as a former lowly scientist. But what? Anyhow, they present her with a choice. Admit what you did was dumb and take a slap on the wrist, or continue to defend your actions like a stubborn mule and have your medical license revoked. Well, we all know how this is going to go, choosing a path of most resistance, so she says that she did the right thing and said that nobody else would do what needed to be done. Okay, as a side note, I really wish they'd give us more clues as to why the 17-year-old had to be held underwater for a minute. I mean, they mentioned he had psychogenic seizures, but couldn't they have just told him to hold his breath for a minute or something? I really don't understand what depriving him of oxygen for a minute would even do. If you know what she was trying to accomplish with this, let me know in the comments because I'm at a slight loss. Anyhow, Communist Big Brother is watching from above because of her answer. It really has sealed her fate, sort of. Basically, she's not leaving this story as a single carefree person. You'll see what I mean later. So now we meet Colonel Simdarov. Don't make fun of me, Russian pronunciations are not my thing. That'll be the last time I mention that. It's like the letters don't actually make the sounds that you think they would. So he talks to her and tells her that he owns a research institution and needs her help. She asks if that's an order, and my boy here knows what the lady's like. He says smart people don't receive orders well, so it's more of a request, and she can decline. To which she comes with him as they take off in a helicopter, and I'm guessing they fly through the night. Maybe it would have been better with a fixed wing craft, but whatever works. While flying there, semi-trucks Hawks then begins telling her about the orbit landing media report and how it was scrubbed. One of the cosmonauts has a severe case of amnesia and can't remember anything about his landing. She asks where the NDA that she has to sign is, clearly, because this is classified stuff, but he mentions there are no papers, she just needs security clearance. And now we meet our cosmonaut once more, Konstantin. Yes. Currently, Dr. Regal is attempting to induce a state of hypnosis on him in order to access those memories that appear to be lost. While going over things with him, Konstantin ends up instead cracking a joke about a whale and calling himself Robert Duvall. He tells Dr. Regal that he can't be hypnotized. Cosmonauts are mentally stronger than the average person. Dr. Regal leaves the safe room and Tatiana then heads in to talk to Konstantin. Using a different approach, she goes into what just seems like an average assessment. She hands him some tea, to which he grabs the cup with no issue. He mentions how he wants her to call his mom and tell her that he's okay and that he will be home soon. She says okay and then leaves. The team outside asks her what she's doing because that was completely underwhelming, and she responds with that the tea was incredibly hot. It should have burned his fingers. She suggests that he has PTSD of some sort and that his sensory receptors or even his peripheral nervous system may have been damaged in some way, which is a valid conclusion given the circumstances. She says that's her official diagnosis, and then Colonel Synopsis says a helicopter will be waiting for her to take her home in the morning. Walking through the glorious Serbian military base landscape, they end up passing some prisoners who have been sent there for hard work. Now, if I know anything about communist Russia back in the day, that's maximum oof. Anyhow, as Tatiana goes back to her room, she realizes she has no phone access or radio. Fun place. We see her back is also heavily damaged as it has a massive scar in it, indicating that something was wrong once upon a time. As she tries to go to sleep, she's just not feeling it, Mr. Krabs, so she decides to go on a casual run at 1 a.m. As she does, are y'all ready to see like the most useless guard in existence? She ends up running into a prisoner who helps her up on her feet, but then starts feeling frisky. So I see a guard in the back doing nothing. I mean, come take a look or something, but they don't. And another prisoner walks up and removes her from his grip. But this was pretty much perfect timing because on her return, Colonel Sanders arrives to her room, glad to see that she's awake. So we now get to see what's actually happening with this cosmonaut. They shut Konstantin, and God, I know I'm butchering that, but they shut him in his room with a glass barrier as Tatiana watches on a heat camera as to what's happening. The cosmonaut is then thrown to the floor as he vomits up this slug thing. As it crawls across the floor, its arms appear to rapidly grow in size, and Tatiana enters to take a look at it as it begins squaring up with her. Getting a good look at it, it has translucent skin and multiple eyes. Actually, I'm not gonna lie to you, this thing straight up looks like the later form of the alien life from the movie Calvin. And Calvin came out before this. Make of that what you will. The Russians stole it. Tatiana then runs outside and has a crisis in the hallway while Colonel Saccharides goes out to check on her. He says that the creature enters and exits Konstantin without harming him, but that he doesn't know this creature is in him. They want to separate Parasite from Cosmonaut, but aren't really sure how. They're trying to understand what happened in space. He also tells her that the other cosmonaut perished upon his return. She asks how, and he says like a hero. Like, okay, it's not very clear. Is she in on the research of this thing or like what? Like, just tell her, dude. He goes on to tell her though that she was chosen above others because of her propensity to take risks. She obliges at this point and says that she needs all note and analyses on the alien. She needs to have 2 sessions a day with Konstantin for an hour each, and she needs free reign to do what she must. He agrees, and they begin attempting to save him. The next day, we get the lowdown that the creature emerged on the first night and attacked a medical technician. They were unable to find a safe method of separating the creature because it has formed a bond with Konstantin at this point. When they tried, the vitals of Konstantin started dipping, which ultimately would have led to his end. He's basically a spacesuit for this creature on this world. But there are benefits. His regeneration ability is well beyond that of a normal human. He was able to recover from substantial wounds in only 2 days. When the parasite enters his body, it shrinks and inhabits an area between his stomach and esophagus and measures only about 30 centimeters, or for everyone using freedom units, which are best units, that's almost about a foot. But when exiting and absorbing oxygen in the surrounding air, it can grow up to 1.5 meters or 4 feet 11 inches, which I have to break away. My wife is basically someone who has translucent skin, and she's about 4 foot 11. It's really all making sense now. And the best part is she watches like the first minute of these videos, so she'll never even know that I said this. But while incubating, it also increases the diameter of both the stomach and esophagus by 30%, which would likely cause tearing in normal circumstances, but considering the healing factor, this is accounted for in the parasite's biology, which we will definitely be covering that later on. The parasite, or symbiote as Tatiana writes, also exits at night at around 3 a.m. and stays out for about an hour, which we will also be covering why this is critically important. Not gonna lie, the makers of this movie really did their homework concerning human biology. As they continue to test Konstantin, he mentions to the doctor that he has a tickle in his throat. Maybe he has a cold. No bro, it's just a giant parasite in your esophagus. As Tatiana later reviews the video files, she assures Regal that she's not after his job or Nobel Prize. Tatiana then calls an orphanage after learning that Konstantin has a son. We now flash over to a kid trying to steal keys from a room. Child appears to have some form of injury, but that doesn't matter because we're now jumping back over to the cosmonaut once more. Working out. Now you may notice this dude appears a little full of himself, right? Well, there's a reason, which we will discuss in the science portion. Anyhow, Tatiana tells Konstantin the reason he's here is because the military thinks he's lost his mind, and they can't have a hero running around who's lost their mind. She accuses him of taking out his cosmonaut, to which that freaks him out. She then gets on the topic of his son, which also rustles his jimmies a little bit, and she says that he's a coward for leaving his son in an orphanage after they had him out of wedlock, they being his girlfriend and him. She then leaves and immediately requests an endocrine test be done in order to measure his hormone levels. That way they can see what exactly the creature is feeding on. Pretty smart. She also suggests he should be placed in a civilian population in order to get a clear clinical picture. Konstantin is then brought into a ward with some beds, a TV, and people, because after all, humans are social creatures, and without socializing, you can start to go stir crazy, which is an absolute real thing, by the way. It happened to me. Back in college, I decided to stay in my dorm for a large portion of Thanksgiving break. Everyone had gone home, and I was quite literally the only person there, as it was somewhat of a commuter school and everyone had just gone home. By day 5, like legit paranoia begins to set in during the nighttime hours as I sat in my dorm, simply because I hadn't talked to someone in such a long time. It's interesting how the mind can start to play tricks on you during isolation. But regardless of that, during Konstantin's stay at more populated areas, he's able to rig up a TV to get a signal and finds that a report is being put out that he and his co-pilot had arrived home safely and were being treated at a government facility for their long time up in space. This obviously freaks him out, as that isn't true at all. Communist news stories, always a classic. Remember kids, never go communist. Which, having said that once before, I had a lot of people mad at me in the comments. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, man. This is about to get real, but like, go look up how many people met their end under Stalin's rule. That's communism. Turns out you could take the choice out of the people's hands, but you can't take the human greed out of a person who's ruling. But in defense of just the absolute state of media anyways, I mean, capitalism's not much better with that. I digress. Tatiana now shows back up to let him know that she needed to activate his almonds in order to make him upset because she needed to test his hormone levels. Konstantin goes on to tell her that he wants to go get his son, and his plan was to go once he got back. He was going to do that as he really only learned about his son like a week prior. Tatiana then tells him that she will help him. Later that night, Tatiana goes and taps on the glass to get the creature's attention. This time, however, it does not attack the glass to scare her. It begins mimicking her movement. She lays down as Dr. Regal continues to ask what she's doing, and she sits up to tell him to, like, wait a minute, dude. And she ends up knocking over a toy, Konstantin, which gets the creature's attention. This gives her an idea. Putting on the suit, she gets him to open up the glass as she sets the toy down in the room. Unfortunately, Mr. Slime Time is leaving slug trails everywhere, which causes her to slip before she can reach out and touch him. This causes the creature to turn away from the toy and then attack her. They're able to save her by flashing on the lights and disorientating the creature, but Tatiana is injured in the process. Colonel Symbiote then goes on to stare down the creature, as now he's pretty upsetty spaghetti at it for injuring probably the only person that knows what to actually do with this thing. And it's because he has an ulterior motive. How'd you know? Doesn't matter, because the creature begins squaring up with him also, ensuring it'll be a great time had by all. Anyhow, he goes to check on Tatiana later, and she tells him that she thinks she knows what's going on. Her hypothesis is that Konstantin isn't actually fully unconscious, that the creature feels the guilt he feels for leaving his son behind, which is why it gravitated towards the toy. They need to get him to Moscow in order to fully separate them, which now I officially know how to say Moscow because I've heard an honest-to-God Russian say it. But the colonel disagrees, and I think we've had enough of the joke of different names at this point, because really it was all a ruse to finally just say Symbiote. Anyways, he says that they can't. If he were to actually tell Moscow what's going on, they would order the termination of Konstantin. Every day he makes up reports to send and inform them about what's going on, but he knows he's running out of time before a board comes to check on what's actually going on. Again, ulterior motives, am I right? Later, as Regal watches the footage of Tatiana being attacked and smiling like a weirdo, Tatiana notices that the footage has been altered. She inquires as to why this is, to which Regal tells her to just go home. She asks what they are feeding the creature, which makes Regal hesitate. Eventually, however, she's able to convince him that he should tell her, and instead, he just shows her. And man, the colonel was talking about being court-martialed. This probably might do it. Getting into the back of whatever the Russian equivalent of a Jeep is, she hides underneath a blanket. Konstantin takes his medicine from the orderlies, and Regal and Tatiana then drive to a different part of the facility as Konstantin is being transported there. Heading into the building, Regal hands Tatiana heat binoculars so she can see what's going on. Pulling a prisoner into a large cage in the middle of the room, they drop him off and close the door. Turning off the lights, everyone begins waiting. The creature then exits a door and enters the cage. Heading towards the prisoner, it sizes him up, making sure that he sees it before immediately attacking his head, and it looks like tearing it off. Tatiana then throws up like a scrub in the truck, which alerts one of the guards, but he's not all that interested interested in finding out what's back there. Regal then drives Tatiana back and starts telling her about the creature. After attacking the medic, Konstantin's vitals immediately improved. They tried everything else from lab rats to pigs until finally they tried feeding a human to it. Regal says it's important for the creature to have the human see it before it attacks to create fear. Cortisol is released in high amounts when a person is afraid, and humanity is the champion of fear, baby. It needs cortisol to survive, or so it's proposed. I think it's something else, but we'll talk about that when we get to like the human endocrine system in a bit. The next day, Tatiana then goes to check on Konstantin and tells him that he needs to go on a run with her, and as she runs, we see her shoes, which will be important later. But Tatiana tells Konstantin that there's basically an alien inside him, like does not ease him into it at all, and he just takes it really well. He tells her to meet him at 1 a.m. in his cell block. After taking his pill, he regurgitates it back up and crushes it. Also knowing what the lady's like, he gets the nurse to come back to his room and watch a movie. He gives her the tea that he crushed up his pill in, and that knocks her out. So apparently this dude's like highly desirable for Russian women because like literally every woman loves him. Russian Chad confirmed. He now opens up the TV and steals a magnet and goes to meet Tatiana. Placing the magnet on the camera, he's able to lure the guard out to come check so that they can sneak past him when he heads back to his post. Once this is accomplished, they head into the medical area where they find the bodies of the convicts Slime Time has been snacking on. Moving into another area, Konstantin admits that he knows about the creature. He sees everything it sees, and he knows he has a bond with it. He also knows that the other cosmonaut is still alive, but not so well. He just wants to get out so that he can go get his son. Tatiana tells him that there's 2 more weeks of people dropping to feed this creature. He gets upset saying, why does he have to meet his end because of this, which she just basically says, it's dinner time anyways, so get over it. Flashing back over to the orphanage, the kid now steals the keys and gets the box on the top shelf. For some reason, this kid is like highly interested in this box. Then heading back over to Tatiana, she heads back to her room, but is stopped by a bunch of guards. They take her to the colonel, and now it all comes out. You see, for all those who don't remember, Russia and the US had like a huge beef around this time. We were like seconds away from nuking one another. In fact, there was a Russian soldier who literally stopped the apocalypse, if you want to know how close we were to ending it all. Stanislav Petrov had received a faulty signal saying that there were incoming nukes from the US heading towards Russia back on September 26, 1983. You see, the US and Russia had exchanged threats after the Soviet Union shot down a Korean airline plane. So things were getting pretty spicy. Anyways, after the alarm came in, rather than immediately let loose the dogs of war, Petrov thought that there was something wrong. The one defining factor was he thought there weren't enough nukes coming from the US, so he suspected it wasn't real. That's it. That's what stopped the world ending from 1983. The amount of nukes being displayed because he knew the US would send everything. Well, it was discovered a satellite had malfunctioned. So by staying his hand, nuclear disaster was thwarted. In summation, also another Russian Chad. So with stuff like this going on, you can kind of see the colonel's point on why he was doing this. His real plan is he wanted to develop something to counter the US apart from nukes. He figured this could be it, but he needs to fully understand it as victors aren't punished. Only if he fails is he screwed. He thinks that he's convinced Tatiana to help, but now she has ulterior motives because she doesn't agree that this thing should become a deployable measure. Later that night, the colonel tells Tatiana that he will show her what they are doing. There's no need to sit in the back of a car with binoculars. He then tells Regal that he knows he brought her last time. As they go to feed the creature, Tatiana tries to stop them by saying she can find another way, and the colonel declines. She then enters the cage herself under the thinking that if she isn't afraid, the creature won't attack. And judging by her breath though, I mean, she sounds pretty afraid. We also see the creature is now more formed after its feedings. We also see Konstantin is in partial control of the creature and that it can hear as it has developed auditory abilities. Meanwhile, Mr. Clumsy Convict over back there accidentally backs up into a fence and makes a loud noise which sends the creature into attack mode. So she wasn't able to save the convict. Again, the colonel says they need to work openly and he will take the heat fully should this thing fail. Because of this, she now has access to everything, which was apparently fairly critical. At first, they were operating under the idea that it may need cortisol after examining the other cosmonaut. She determines that a small tumor was on his adrenal gland, leading to Addison's disease. This essentially stops the body from being able to release cortisol, which can lead to a whole host of issues. She then begins discussing with Regal in Latin, saying that they are escaping tonight as Konstantin needs to get to Moscow and to a real hospital. Regal says it's crazy, but eventually agrees to help. Regal then gives Tatiana a syringe in the office area, saying that if she escapes, he was forced to do this. If she doesn't, he didn't know anything about it. She then walks up to the guard and stabs him in the neck with a knockout drug. Ow. Tatiana then goes to get Konstantin. He tries to tell her that she needs to leave because he's earned this punishment for abandoning his son. She tells him his son's name and says that if they get out, they can go get him. Anyhow, as the guard patrols, he ends up patrolling right up to a body that they didn't hide and finding his comrade knocked out, which kicks off everything. Regal at this point goes to call the board on the only working phone. He moves a desk in front of the door and then begins his call. The response team is now activated by the Colonel to take out Tatiana, but not Konstantin. The Colonel then heads back to his office and takes out Regal for being a coward in his eyes and basically telling on him. Meanwhile, back at the vehicle bay, Tatiana is injured from a shot, and she throws a syringe over to Konstantin to knock himself out, which then releases the creature. The creature then proceeds to exit and take out the entire strike team sent after them. Tatiana then loads up Konstantin and takes off, leaving the creature to fight as they break out of the facility. The Colonel now heads in to actually throw hands at the creature itself, which unfortunately this is not Independence Day where we get to see Will Smith punch an alien. As morning breaks, Konstantin isn't looking so hot. After the Colonel's battle, he lost his hand, but gets some good shots on the creature, causing Konstantin to puke up blood from his injuries sustained to the creature. Or maybe it just happens to be coincidental. We'll kind of figure that out later. Dragging him out, Tatiana looks and sees, oh lord, the Colonel has already caught back up to them. Tatiana says that she was mistaken and that Konstantin can't be separated from the creature as him and it have become fully adapted. Colonel basically, I think, tries to break her collarbone at this point or pushes his finger into the bullet wound, I'm not sure. They release the creature so it'll go back into Konstantin, but it ends up taking out the guards instead. It then crawls back to the car, and as the Colonel turns around, it basically slashes his head in half, exposing those sweet, sweet brains. It then proceeds to crawl back into the throat of Konstantin, healing both him and itself. As the board shows up in the distance due to Regal's calls, Konstantin then takes himself out as well as the creature, as they both need one another to survive. And now we finally get closure on what in the world is happening with the orphan in the box. As Tatiana heads to the orphanage, the kid inside finally receives the box that it's been trying to get, and it's Tatiana's shoes inside. So there you have it. The calls were coming from inside the orphanage the whole time. Or really, Tatiana was the orphan. She goes back to the orphanage to adopt Konstantin's son. See, I told you her carefree life was over after what has happened, because once you get kids, that's over. Talk about trading one parasite for another. Am I right? Nah, kids are important to your genetic lineage. Remember, for you to be here, everyone related to you or directly related to you had to get some action. So keep the streak alive. So I think the first place that we should start with the Sputnik alien is its physical morphology, as there are some clues on its body that may indicate what its usual prey is based on how it hunts and the attributes its body has. Then we will move on to its actual food source and why cortisol seems to be critical to its survival, because I would propose it's not so much the cortisol that's important for it, but another effect cortisol has that would allow the creature to feed. We know the alien's life cycle is one that is considered fairly parasitic at first. While it is able to keep its host alive, it would appear that at the beginning of the infection, it takes more from its host than it really gives back, or really it's just embedding in its host. Piloting the cosmonaut like a meat suit, literally, it blunts the normal reaction by simply being inside of him, but that isn't to say Konstantin doesn't have the ability to control his own body. As the creature continues to grow, there's a critical point where it switches from parasite to symbiote, and this is likely characterized by the linking of the two consciousness. But before getting into that, let's first talk about the life cycle the creature goes through, which will also give us a clue as to its morphology forming, which will give it the ability to hunt down the flesh of humans, or at least hormones of humans. When we first see it outside the ship, it appears to be wispy. Even though we just catch a glimpse of it, it may have just really been the tail. Clearly, it is able to open the hatch to get inside, at which point it attacked the cosmonaut with Addison's disease, but he was deemed non-suitable. Get it? Non-suitable? Ha! Anyhow, moving on to the next cosmonaut, it was likely still in its wispy form with smaller arms, as it was able to cram itself down the esophagus and towards the stomach. Now, it may sound bizarre how the arms were practically underformed or unformed at this point, but considering that we have seen its growth patterns, the reality is whatever was in space would have to be able to contend with a normal human esophagus without ripping it completely apart, and this is why I would say it's essentially in its infancy stage or larval stage. Quickly after the feedings commence, they learned that this thing actually ate people's heads. It was able to continue to grow until its main set of arms would be comparable to our own concerning shoulder joints and humerus and radius and ulna bones, along with hands. And this would form, allowing it to manipulate the world around it, but a new pair of arms would also begin to grow at this point. These arms were attached at the bottom of the presumed rib cage near what would be considered the abdominal area. However, based on the mouth that opens up on this creature, these arms are likely intended to just hold on to prey when feeding. Think of it as a sort of mandibles of a praying mantis, attaching and bringing in smaller prey or holding on to larger prey. At this point, the bond with Konstantin would start to become solidified. While Konstantin had knowledge of the creature and what it was doing, and that it was in fact attacking people, it would appear the bond would be getting stronger and stronger as the creature continued to grow, which in turn allowed him to control it as it reached what would appear to be more in line with its final form. Continuing on, these arms would also grow over time, going from what appeared to just be small singular points to becoming much larger, but still dwarfed by the upper and lower set of limbs. And we will refer to these creatures as hexapods because these limbs, I think, would be long enough and would in fact be limbs rather than just mandibles. And if you didn't know, the back limbs are largely still there even when the creature creature is younger. The lower body does appear to form last, as the upper arms would be more useful in terms of environment manipulation, but it would also appear the legs form at the same time as the tail is. However, the creature does not have access to them in terms of usability at the beginning. This is likely due to the fact that, because again, the creature must incubate inside of other animals, it is still considered larval and its limbs have not fully come online, so to speak. With the regular feedings and time passing, the creature would continue to grow even inside of the esophagus and stomach, which, by the way, definitely ruined Constantine's pyloric sphincter, because that area is like mega stretched, even if it's repaired. Talk about acid reflux for life. Oh, and by the way, if you do have acid reflux, there's this stuff called omeprazole. It is a proton pump inhibitor, so it just reduces the acid in your stomach. Straight up cash if you have like beer or something. Highly recommend it. Now, I'm not sponsored by acid reducer medications, but considering my advanced age now, I wish I was. You can call me at any time. So anyways, as the creature continues to grow, it will gain access to all these limbs, making it more lethal as time goes on. Eventually, it would appear that considering it leaves the host body for longer and longer times, this would possibly be a permanent arrangement in the future. However, what I can't seem to figure out is if it has to stay in the host, but wants to leave each time, would it eventually be something of an arrangement if only it needs to be near the host to stay alive? We know both their vitals drop without the other, but what is clear is the creature does leave the body. My thinking on this could be that it simply does have to eat, and under normal circumstances, it would leave and then return back to the animal with no issue. The problem is humans are supposedly highly intelligent. Some humans, let me clarify. Because of this, we would notice a 3.5 meter cobra monkey crawling in and out of our buddy's mouth at night, which, might be a little disturbing. But we will get to the bond with this creature and what the humans share when we talk about the nervous system and internal changes to the body in order for the creature to be considered symbiotic with the host. So, with the life cycle out of the way, apart from the permanent arrangement, considering Constantine takes himself out before we can fully understand the later adult years of this creature, let's take a look at the physical morphology, including internally what's going on, which will likely give us a clue as to what may or may not have been its prey of choice, and also how it may have been able to survive out in space. So the first thing we know about this creature is it has the capacity to stand upright, but that does not mean its native stance. Sort of like how bears will stand upright to fight, and also chimps and gorillas from time to time will walk around on 2 feet, so too does the Sputnik alien. However, it's more of a natural form of locomotion to be quadrupedal. I know I said it's a hexapod, but the abdominal mandibles likely do not aid in walking like what we would see with ants. Instead, the fore and hind limbs are used in walking and running. The creature will go from being Mr. Slugtrail, dragging himself across the floor, leaving goop everywhere, to eventually a creature who freaks me out because it skitters too much. As an adult, it will stand roughly 3.5 meters tall, or 4 feet 11 inches, but once it heads back inside of Constantin, it will shrink itself to just 30 centimeters in order not to damage the host to the 10th degree, because that thing is definitely a jaw snapper at that point if it didn't. Although even at 30 centimeters or 11 inches, it would still cause damage to the host, which is why it secretes chemicals to repair the host, which we will also talk about when we get to the endocrine system. It also houses itself in a sac within the host, and this is likely for a multitude of reasons. The first thing is that this encapsulates the entire body. This would protect it from the constant exposure to a host's stomach acids, because likely the body can still be damaged despite it having survived in space. But this capsule allows it to also likely interface with the body itself. Having this membranous layer may make it selective in terms of what it's taking in. Say for the instance, like how cortisol is mentioned prevalently throughout this movie, well, these hormones, including others, may be able to pass through the membrane of this capsule, which also gives a reading as to what the host is feeling or doing, allowing the creature to become more in tune with the host. It's almost as if the Sputnik alien becomes something of an organ, becoming one with the host, which, much like if you lost an organ, your body would likely suffer as well. But there's another side to this concerning what the alien does. It's clear that the hormone it releases also affect the body of the host, which I know we will get there, but let's kind of wrap up the morphology real quick so we don't get like too sporadic. If you didn't see, it's easy to miss because the creature is either covered in blood or needs the darkness, but remember those abdomen mandibles that I was talking about? Well, that's because the mouth continues through the central chest cavity of this creature. The throat would be around mid-thoracic, and the actual top portion of the mouth where the teeth unfold is simply probably what holds on to the front of the prey's skull. The teeth actually line the opening of the chest the entire way down, and this is how it's able to completely rip off human heads. In fact, you could almost compare its physiology to that of a head crab from Half-Life to give you a similar point of reference. The creature also possesses 8 eyes, gross, and they're also jet black, meaning that they are pretty much taking in all light possible. But this allows it to see the world in a way beyond what humans are capable of, as it's not a compound eye, but this would give more points of reference. Then we have the wings that flare out from each side of the head. This is interesting as it initially doesn't have it or any auditory functions, but likely this would change over time, and these would direct sound, allowing the creature to hear prey from extremely far away. So the jet black eyes allow it to see in darkness and then the large ears direct sound. So now let's discuss the space survival for a moment. Seems odd, right? Well, looking at this thing's skin, it would appear as though it's somewhat soft, and it's susceptible to rounds as when Colonel Sanders ends up blasting him. However, if you notice, which you should have, as when they open the box later, this thing gets right back up, indicating that severe damage is not even close to being achieved. This creature acted like nothing happened. Now, this would be because of the healing factor that it also lends to its host, but this would suggest a few things. First, its skin may actually be a form of exoskeleton resisting damage beyond what our own skin provides. This thing almost also appears to be adapted to space as it drifts around, which means the barrier would have to be airtight to be able to shut off areas of its body from a vacuum. As you might guess, this means it would be much more hardy of an animal than anything on our planet. The second option is the same mucus capsule that allows it to survive in the human body is also secreted when it's in space, but rather than exiting it, it instead clings to the surface of the body, providing it with moisture and protection from the elements. I'm inclined to believe that it's actually a combination of both in reality, mainly because of the damage that it's able to receive and also survive, but also because it's not completely desiccated in space. But there are internals in this creature that I believe help it survive, like ionizing radiation from the sun, because in space there is no protection of a magnetosphere that allows it to survive, and this may be an adaptation from where it originally evolved. Believe it or not every planet has a giant magnetic field protecting it from the wheel in the sky that keeps turning. Take Venus, for instance. Considered to be Earth's twin, the fact is it has no functional magnetic field to protect it from the sun's aggressive radiation emissions. Because of this, not only is it like really hot because of runaway global greenhouse effects, but it's also getting blasted daily with radiation. Life here, even if it was like habitable and it was a lot cooler of a planet, it would require a form of DNA polymerase much stronger than what we have on Earth because it needs to resist the effects of the radiation. You see, we have adapted to Earth's conditions, but it's possible other life could adapt to much harsher parameters than what even we could survive. This may also explain why the creature is able to survive in these environments when exposed to space. Should the Sputnik alien had evolved on, say, like a moon or planet without a magnetic field, for any life to form, it would be capable of dealing with periods of radiation that otherwise would sterilize Earth life. For this to happen, its genetic coding would need to be preserved, or something within its skin needs to be able to reflect, or even the capsule itself protect it from this radiation, which may also in turn explain its entire hunting pattern. So here's what I propose are roughly the origins of this creature based on its physiology. The reason it crawls inside a host is because likely wherever it is from has no magnetic field to protect it. However, there were animals on this planet who may have had thicker coating or something within their skin that reflects radiation and could offer protection to the parasite while it was forming. The creature comes out at night because of the natural cycles of awakening and sleeping for the host, much like we have. The Sputnik alien comes out at night to feed, as that side of the planet isn't being blasted with radiation from the sun. As the creature grew, it would become more and more successful after the growing period is over at surviving by itself. And this would explain why the creature would be a symbiote as well. The survival of its host is absolutely critical for it staying alive on this hypothesized planet, as should the host meet its end, then so too it, as the radiation would destroy it during its growth period. In fact, it's completely possible that whatever host it's usually attacking actually welcomes this symbiote because it helps it. This almost makes me think that the creature on the outside of the Earth reentry capsule that the cosmonauts were in might have been an adult, and that the creature was implanted in them, but that's just speculation on my part. This may also suggest that as an adult, the creature would have a better form of DNA polymerase and proofreading abilities concerning its genetic coding because the body is more stable as an adult. But when the creature is young, considering the rampant cellular division due to growth demands, should it be damaged, this would cause it to receive too many issues, which could lead to a maladaptation. Being a symbiote, this keeps the host alive and bonds with it, becoming a permanent part, or possibly a permanent part, which allows it to continue its life cycle. But being apart from the host means that it becomes like something of an organ, as mentioned previously. Much like how a male anglerfish attaches to a female and basically becomes just a testicle for the female as the rest of its body becomes vestigial, likely this creature attaches to a host and continues to grow, but becomes a critical part of the host. So the question is, how is this accomplished and what actually happens with the host? Well, as mentioned previously, I believe the membrane that surrounds the creature is a critical point of interaction. By attaching to the tissue, it can serve to facilitate transfusion from the host bloodstream into the bloodstream of the creature, thus giving it the ability to know what the host is communicating within its body. And this is why the creature only comes out at night. Did you know personally that your cortisol levels are at their lowest in the middle of the night? Considering the creature has an innate ability to detect cortisol, this would be the signal that the creature is waiting for. It exits the body when the cortisol levels dip, and this tells the creature it's safe to release chemicals to knock out the host and paralyze its muscles. In fact, our brain does this when we go to sleep. Chemicals have been found in rats known as gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine, which switches off cells that promote promote movement. This is why sleep paralysis is so horrifying, because you wake up but you can't move as these cells are switched off, but you are actively awake. So it's always good when like a sleep paralysis demon whispers your name to you, not a problem at all. But anyhow, this chemical would be released into the bloodstream via the capsule membrane, which would paralyze the host further once cortisol minimum levels were reached. But it also has other abilities when interacting with the host. It would appear that one of the hormones the creature releases keeps the host running at a higher metabolic rate, allowing them to heal faster. The mitotic pathways in the body would be tripped and turned on should injuries take place externally, but likely this is an adaptation for when the creature enters the host bodies. On top of this, it does appear to suppress the peripheral nervous system, and this is how it actually interacts with the nervous system. By suppressing this, things that might cause the host pain or injuries, such as picking up hot tea, are not felt, so that the host does not react aggressively towards it. And this might be a byproduct of considering that it's entering a host's throat. Causing pain to the host is not what it's going for. So likely some injury does take place as the chemical is released, which will allow the creature to heal its host as well. These proteins that the creature likely releases are known as cyclin, which are responsible for communication amongst some other hormones and proteins. This would speed up the healing process in the body, but what's interesting is the alien symbiote may in another way take over the metabolism of the host. If the creature has the ability to take over mitotic pathways, it may also be releasing inhibitory proteins to prevent the host's naturally occurring mechanisms from remaining active. This would be critical for the host to maintain connection with the parasite, as otherwise they'll expire. But without the host, the creature, if early enough in its life cycle, may also expire because it seems to have no problem leaving the host eventually. These proteins stick around after the creature leaves, and should enough time pass, they begin affecting metabolism of the host, causing their vitals to begin crashing. So why is this? Well, it's clear to me that firstly, the Sputnik alien has an oxygen-based metabolism. Why do I believe this? Well, because of the cortisol requirement. I think it's a little odd that the creature makes its prey see them before attacking. Well, the argument is, well, it uses the cortisol. And I'm going to have to disagree. Why not eat just the adrenal gland then? I think they're looking at the wrong aspect. So what does cortisol actually do? Well, under stressful conditions, cortisol provides the body with glucose by tapping into protein stores via gluconeogenesis, and this takes place in the liver. This energy can help an individual fight or flee a stressor. Basically, they don't call it the stress hormone for nothing. It releases more glucose into the bloodstream and drastically increases the glucose in the brain of a person as they are about to have to either fight for their life or flee for it. And it's important for the brain to be running at top capacity for this. So here we have a creature that apparently relies on cortisol and makes its prey afraid, and then commences to attack by heading towards the head with its huge mouth. What I believe the creature is actually doing is increasing the available blood glucose. Now I can hear you now. Well, Roanoke is an alien. Why can't it just use cortisol? Well, the reality is there's not really that many energy stores in the actual steroid hormone of cortisol. But you know what does have a lot of energy in it? Glucose. And you know who absorbs oxygen upon leaving the body, making it readily available to break down glucose? The Sputnik alien. And you know who is already likely having proteins and hormones available in his body to break down glucose, considering it may be running its host metabolism? You guessed it, the Sputnik alien. The alien has all the workings of an oxygen-based metabolism and appears to use cortisol as an indicator for increased glucose availability in the bloodstream, and specifically in the brains of animals. This would imply that this creature lived on a planet with other animals that had similar physiology to those of our planet, but they were much more capable of surviving ionizing radiation, considering the creature can live out in space. And finally, the consciousness link. To me, not only does it have hold on the metabolism of an animal as well as its hormones, but the central nervous system as well. I don't find it shocking that it would choose an area close to the spinal cord and brainstem of an animal. The symbiote is essentially fully in when it comes to choosing a host. For us personally, I mean, this would be something we don't want in our bodies, but in reality it helps and bonds to the point that it may even begin copying our neural patterns in our brains. Essentially, it becomes an extension of our nervous system. So there's this concept, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, that our spinal cord is really just a bridge with the orders given by the brain, right? Well, this actually isn't entirely true. A man who was paralyzed actually had a spinal stimulator attached to the detached portion of his spine, and it was activated. After not moving his feet for years, he was able to do it by thinking about moving his feet, with the spinal stimulator providing the electrical shock needed. Now, it's not a perfect process, but what this shows is even detached from our brains, portions of our nervous system can be activated by thinking about it. The same may be able to be applied to this creature. If the distance is great, I think it is able to move by itself. However, in close proximity to the host, it becomes an extension. Now, the issue is there is unknown science here. How it is able to communicate in distances is beyond our current understanding of neurology, but we do know that the brain does in fact produce an electrical field. Whether the creature is fine-tuned to this field or not is not currently understood, but considering he is able to control it, this is what I believe would best explain the nervous system interaction taking place. The electrical field of the brain must have some some proximity control over the creature and vice versa. So I believe this creature is adapted to radiation on a planet where it was forced to seek refuge inside of other animals. Ultimately, it could interact with the human endocrine system before completely taking it over. It would release inhibitory enzymes in order to manage it, but upon separation, the host body would no longer be able to function without this newfound organ. However, it may be completely possible that this creature intends to live its entire life inside of the actual host until either meets their end, which in turn would be the end of both of them. The benefits it offers allows the host to be able to be seen as a symbiote in some ways, but for a human, this would not be desirable at all. Mainly because of the fact that even if it's helping, we tend to get weirded out by things living within our bodies, like regular tapeworms helping to calm our immune systems, for instance.